Anyway, thanks again. As you can see, I'm joining you from my home. We're still, actually, we're still required to work from home unless we actually have to be there. And I'm wearing a coat because it's freaking cold here in Michigan. Um, let me get started. And so I'm gonna so I call this talk writing for the tough crowd. Um, you know, and I don't say a tough crowd, right? Writing for the tough crowd because it's always a tough crowd. Whoever your audience is, almost all the time, and it's kind of cynical to say this, but almost all the time, they don't want to be reading what you're writing, and that's true. So this is some advice to make your writing attractive, engaging, and accessible, and getting the audience on your side. So I'm the graduate programs director, and so I look at writing from many different viewpoints as a former student, of course, as a professor, as an administrator, and also as the executive editor of this journal. So I realize you haven't heard of it, but it is considered to be the top ranked journal in my field. Um, and I've been at this job for a little over a year, as Yu Jung said. And as executive editor, I am the first point of contact for manuscripts as they come into the door to the journal. After it comes through the staff, who make sure that formatting, content, and things like that are all there. So on any given day, I will look at between 6 and 8 manuscripts, and on most days, I will immediately reject all of them. And of course, impact is important, scope is important, fit with the journal is important. The science has to be there. But a lot of the time, maybe almost half the time, I'm letting something go just because of the writing. Okay? And there are times when I reach far down into the pile of something that's not written well, because I think the content would be perfect for the journal, and those I just send back and say we'd like to consider this, but please rewrite it. But most of the time, if an article is written poorly for a journal, then I think that's a bad sign right off the bat. Okay, I do look at the science. Okay, and so it's not just the writing, but I want to acknowledge these two folks here. Starting the one on the bottom, Max. Max Chung is he actually started the journal about 6 years ago. And so he was kind of my mentor in terms of editing. The guy on the top is Rick Verstra. He was my previous PhD advisor in the cell and molecular biology program at University of Wisconsin. And I put him here because I want to underscore the importance of patience in writing. And this guy is the most patient person that I know, and he tried to teach me patience in writing. And when I'm talking about patience, I'm talking about the first manuscript that we wrote together. Went through, before it was sent in, went through 27 edits, 27 rounds of editing, 27 versions over the course of almost a year. And during that time, he would look at each version, carefully edit it, meet with me, discuss, why he made those edits, how it can be improved, and so on and so forth. And in the end, it was worth it. We snuck it into PNAS, and I have to say, the science was pretty marginal, but I think the writing had a lot to do with that. So, what are the most important rules for scientific writing? Okay, so first of all, I think there are no rules. your writings are all going to be different. Okay, each of your writings are going to have a different purpose, a different audience, a scope, and potential impact. Okay, there really are no rules. And the second most important rule is just do what your faculty advisor tells you to do, right? And I don't want to be telling you stuff and then you incorporate that into your writing and then it gets bounced from your advisor or your committee or anything like that. So, sometimes it's just good to do what you're told to do and understand that there might be a better way to do it. Okay, so take the following advice with a grain of salt. And then the third rule, I think, is critical. Okay, write for the busy reader. Okay, who in almost all cases would rather be doing something else than reading your writing. Again, cynical, but true. And this idea is I'm borrowing it from this fantastic publication that I found. It's called Elements of Style for Writing Scientific Journal Articles by Griffiths, Perry, and Hall. It's a few years old. But the thesis of this is that you really have to expect that the reader has little time to penetrate your writing, little time to look at it, and you have to do your best to make it very accessible, okay, and very interesting. Okay, we have to make each part of it stand on itself as something that's digestible and interesting. Okay. So I put this is a free online PDF, and I put the URL or the title and authors down here. You know how to Google. So please look this up. Take home a copy. I use this for my writing classes, and this has a lot of other things in it besides looking at structure. It has things on grammar, style, sentence structure, tenses, voice, common mistakes to avoid, all this kind of stuff, which I consider small things in writing, but collectively add up to the most part. And so this talk is not going to be about grammar or style, but I'll refer you to this doc. Okay, so for the workshop, what I'd like to do, and let me know, you, Jung, if it seems, and James, if it seems like it's a good idea. I'd like to break it into 3 parts. And first part, talk about telling your science as a story. Okay, the importance of storytelling, recognizing the components of a good story, not necessarily a scientific story, but how to recognize those and how to incorporate those into the writing. And then have a breakout and then come back and talk about audience. Okay, get to know the readers, how to define your audience and how to adapt your writing for the specific audience, and have another breakout session there. Hopefully you all brought some writing to work on today. And then come back. And then the last part would be about writing effective abstracts. Because of all the writing that you're doing, probably the abstract is the most critical. And I'll spend some quality time at that, and then give you a breakout, which can continue as long as you feel like working with your room. Okay, and probably I'll take off and leave you sometime there. And I'd like to come and visit you in the breakout rooms and see how you're doing. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think this looks like a good schedule.
Okay, thanks, James. Okay, so I want to start what I call getting comfortable telling a good story. Okay, and I have to say for myself and many students that I meet that this is one of the most important things that blocks writing. One of the things that contributes the most to inability to write. Okay, you've got to know the science. Okay, but how do you tell a good story? And most students aren't uncomfortable telling their science as a story. I think a lot of students have convinced themselves that their work is not important. A lot of students are not excited about their work. Okay, and so how can you possibly convey excitement and the element of importance if you don't feel it yourself? And so I would say, from time to time, just give yourself a breakout room. Just go by yourself and think about things. Relax and ask yourself, you as a scientist or as a soon-to-be scientist, or if you're just reporting on other science, okay, what is the story that you want to tell? And then you ask yourself, is the story important? And hopefully the answer is yes. Okay, but why is the story important? And then ask yourself, am I excited about telling this story? And hopefully you are excited about telling the story. And so if you got a story and you've convinced yourself that it's important and you're excited about telling it, then that's great. So these three simple things are often the most significant hurdle to writing. And so this is why I want to underscore the importance of a story in your writing. So what are the critical elements of a story? Well, first of all, the character. So this is the main character is someone with whom the audience can identify and feel different levels of closeness with other characters in the story. Okay, this eventually engages the reader. It personalizes the story. It brings the reader into the story. It invests the reader into the story. The setting. Okay, where does the story take place? When does it take place? Okay, what is the complexity of the setting? You know, socio-economic environment, political setting, weather, and this can be framed in the context of past critical events, upcoming important events, irrespective of events, and the plot. Of course, the plot. What happens? When? How? Why? What is the result? Okay. Now, we don't normally think of scientific writing in these terms, right? And the plot. Okay, this is our research. Okay, the plot. And in a story, there are different ways to structure a plot. But in general, we find 6 main elements, right? The scene, okay, the introduction, the characters, and the setting, the conflict. What's the problem faced by the character in the setting? Some important incident, I call the inciting incident, that sets the stage to the remainder of the plot. Okay, and so this is a transition from the setting to the action. And the action, the major part of the story. So how does the character respond to the inciting incident in this setting? A critical event, okay, the most important event of the story in which the character takes action that directly addresses the conflict, and a broader meaning. What does the story represent? So does the story resonate with the listener in terms of broader meaning, life experience, morals, etc., etc. Okay. So thinking about a good story, do you all know the Moth radio? So the Moth radio is a collection of short stories, and these are typically like 2 to 5 minutes, told by people like you and me. And I think it's for my students, I strongly encourage them to go into the Moth and find stories and identify elements of a story that they find engaging. And then think about what elements and what parts of those elements can they incorporate into their own writing. Okay. And so I want to play a story for you. And I will, and hopefully if I get into the Moth here and do the audio, hopefully it'll come through to the Zoom. But the story is called Soft Science. It's a story about a girl competing in a high school science fair and her over-dominant father, okay, who's also a scientist. So let me try this here, and just as I start, just kind of nod your head if you can hear the audio.
My K-8 Catholic school science fair
Yeah, we
was
can
the
hear it.
most vicious
Okay.
competition you could ever imagine. Everybody loved to participate in it, and the reason it was probably super competitive was because the school was located just down the street from the National Institute of Health, and employees from NIH came to judge the competition. As it happened, my dad worked at NIH. Yeah, I know. He's to put it mildly, an incredibly competitive, overachiever, internationally famous scientist. And he was deeply invested in my science fair projects. Fifth grade was the first year that I was eligible to participate in this project. And he decided what my project fair would be. It involved a monkey skull. That's all I remember because I was the pariah for the rest of the year. My fifth grade class thought I had killed a monkey. I didn't, but maybe my dad did, I'm not sure. So skip to seventh grade where, I've entered my teen years and felt like I could be myself a little bit more. And I put my foot down and I said, Dad, I'm going to choose my own science fair project. I'm doing something on dreams. And my dad said, no, that is soft science. You have to do... You have to do a hard science. And I said, no, I'm doing soft science. So I did my project on dreams and I didn't do well, meaning I got an honorable mention and I didn't win. So my dad was okay with that because he was going to use that for leverage in eighth grade when it really mattered. Eighth grade mattered because that's when the judges didn't just come by and observe your project, they interviewed you. They grilled you about your methods, your analysis, your results, and conclusion. Yeah, welcome to suburban DC. So my dad waited for eighth grade and said, okay, what project are you going to do? And in a sort of political statement, I said, I'm doing a project on the effects of television on test taking. He said, again, that's soft science, you can't do that. And the reason why I chose the television is because he wouldn't let us watch television ever. So I went ahead with my project because it turned out that there were about 5 or 6 second graders that lived on my street. And so I drafted these various quizzes and I had them watch a different a different TV show each day. And I got my data and then I proceeded to do my analysis, but unfortunately there was a huge outlier. Some of you might be familiar with Jordan Ellenberg, the Wisconsin professor who just wrote a New York Times bestseller called How to Be Right About Everything. He was one of my subjects. So the study didn't go quite as planned. But nonetheless, I was still going to present my data in the science fair. So my dad really, really wanted to be involved and make this connection with me. And the reason is that everything my dad touched became a championship affair. I have 3 brothers. They all played soccer. My dad coached them. They had championship seasons. My sister loves horses. She did competitive horseback riding. He was her coach. She was the champion. I am neither athletic nor a horse lover. So my dad didn't know how to make me a champion. But he did sit me down and attempt to practice with me for this judging interview process. So Saturday of the science fair came and the first judge came up to do the interview. And I was a nervous wreck. All I wanted to do was get through it. And I did. And I breathed a sigh of relief like this. At that moment, my dad jumped out from around the corner and said, here's everything you did wrong. So I listened. I tried really hard to remember everything he said so that when Judge 2 and Judge 3 came along, I would do better. I did get through Judge 2 and I did get through Judge 3, and I was just so happy to be done. And as the science fair ended, we got in the car and I was just relieved because my dad wasn't telling me that I did anything wrong anymore. He was just sitting there silently. So I was happy. I was very, very happy. So you can imagine my surprise on Monday morning. They made the announcement about the saint of the day and her biography. They also then announced who had died from the parish over the weekend. And then they announced the science fair winner. It was me. And that made me eligible for the county science fair. I only have 5 minutes, so I won that one too. I also got an award from the National Science Foundation, and that was actually a punishment because I had to go and observe for a full Saturday what they do at the National Science Foundation. They only do hard science. But the best reward was what my father said to me. He said to me, out of my 5 children, you were the only one to defy me, and it was the correct thing to do. Thank you.
Okay, so that was, I hope that you all agree that that was a very engaging story. But I would ask you, what made it engaging? What were some of the components that made it fun to listen to? Anyone? They're all so silent.
I think like the setting of having like a stressful presentation is relatable to a lot of people, especially to a lot of scientists.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for that. So she impregnated this whole story with many things that are relatable to the audience. So the stressful situation. Um, she talked about going to Catholic school. That's a lot of the population. She talked about parents not letting her watch TV. Well, she talked about winning soccer games and things like that. So those are establishing connections with the audience, okay? And that invests the audience, that draws the audience in. But what else? Anyone? You can raise your hand.
I have a few suggestions in the chat actually. So Parker said there were plot twists and humor.
Okay, plot twists and humor. Yeah, of course, humor all throughout, right? What else? I have to figure out how to get back to look at the I'm sorry, not a Zoom nerd. I don't know how to get to see the chats when I'm sharing my screen.
So Ashley said that it wasn't overwhelming and I was easy to follow along.
Okay, so the storyline was very simple, right? So thanks, Ashley. Okay, so storyline, humor, engagement with the audience, relationship with the audience. Okay, so let's think about in our own scientific stories, like how many of those components can we draw in? Okay, humor. Are we allowed to use humor in scientific writing? No, we're not. Right? I wish we could, but humor is off the list, right? How else can we make our scientific writing really engaging? So hopefully you've all brought writing to work on to this workshop, and I want you to think about these 6 elements, okay? And then which of these elements can we draw into our scientific writing to create a better story? And how can we do that? So I'm going to now put you into breakout rooms, and I want you to think about storytelling. Okay, each participant tell the story of your research to the rest of the people in the room. If you're not doing your own research, you can pick research that you'd like to write about. If you've got more than one project, pick your favorite one. But just spend the next 15 minutes, okay, storytelling your science. Okay, and when you come back, I'm going to ask you, ask if we can come up with a consensus of elements that made those stories engaging for you. So now putting you into breakout rooms. So let me just ask you, and I can see your chats now. I can't see your chats now. Your chats disappeared again. So Yujong, if people aren't voicing up, can you just read chats to me? So I was just wondering how that went. Was it comfortable telling your science as a story? Did you learn anything? Did you learn anything listening to other stories? What stories did you hear that really worked, that really made the story engaging? Anyone?
I can comment, I guess. So I think the most, oh, let me turn my video. I think the most like interesting and easy to follow stories were the ones that started with like a very broad and relatable thing. So a lot of us, you know, talk about like biologic systems. So like starting with something relatable like the human body and then kind of transitioning down into the smaller, more nitty gritty of your project in a way that an audience that has no idea, like has no background in that, can still follow it. So I think everyone in my group did a really good job of kind of giving the big picture and then zooming in so everyone could follow along, even if they didn't understand every detail.
Okay, thanks, Noam. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think in our group, what made everyone's sort of storytellings a little bit as accessible as possible is sort of beginning with like important context like that, or like something that's relatable to people in their day-to-day lives, and to help us understand like the significance of the research and like why it's important in general, and to also sort of like prime you to almost anticipate the next steps that the researchers are going to take. Like, you know, this is the context, this is the problem, and then as a reader, or in this case listener, you're sort of already thinking about maybe where they're going to go with their strategy to approach that problem.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
Steve, it looks like we have a quick question in the chat from Bobby, which is, what is a good strategy for balancing background with space/time constraints, which is definitely something that I personally have struggled with, you know, trying to like write out a specific Ames page or whatever, but to also include like the relevant context.
Okay, yeah, that is a really good question, and I'm going to tackle that in the next section. So, but someone made a really interesting point that analogies and anthropomorphizing were popular in our group and helped us understand the story. Okay, so I just put you into groups randomly, and chances are you weren't in a group with people with similar expertise, and so you had talked about your story to a different audience than you might normally be comfortable doing that. And so that is leading into the next session, and that is get to know your readers. Okay, who is your audience? Who are you writing for? Okay, and think about this again, very cynical coming from an editor. What's the cost and reward for reading it? And how can you minimize the cost and maximize the reward? Okay, so Bobby asked, what's a good strategy for balancing background with space-time constraints? So in the breakout room, I looked at an abstract that, you know, basically had no real background. It was kind of went right into the technology, into the experiments, and that is fine because it was going to be submitted to a very specialized journal. Okay, who are the readers? Okay, only people that already understood the background. Okay, so if that person were going to submit that same thing to Science, the journal Science, okay, then of course they'd have to put 1 or 2 sentences of background there. So a good strategy for balancing background with space-time constraints: only put as much background as needed for your specific audience to understand what you're talking about. Okay, and that background necessarily has to be larger when you write to a more general audience. Okay, a more general journal. Examples here, your representative in Harrisburg or DC, your thesis advisory committee. Okay, right there, those are 2 very different audiences. Okay, your writing always has to be customized. And even if you're writing for your representative or writing for the undergraduate intern in your representative's office, okay, think about that, how that writing can be customized. Okay, then, you know, a scientist doing similar work, that style is much different than if you're talking to a reporter from a local newspaper. Okay, a grant review panel. Okay, know your audience. Are these folks from a wide range of disciplines, or are they all coming from a similar field as you? Okay, that's actually essential to know how to write, and to know how to write is very important for getting that grant. So your more general audience, general public, we call them, in my field, we call them stakeholders. Those are the people that your work is most important to. Administrators, family and friends, okay? They have a wide general appreciation for science. You assume a high school level mastery of scientific concepts. As we get more specialized in our in our careers, we tend to know more about our specific subjects, but we tend to lose creativity and imagination. Okay, and that's still present in the most general audience, and not necessarily interested in science. Okay, and your most specific audience, your thesis committee, faculty advisor, scientists doing similar work in other institutions, your fellow students in the lab group. Okay, think about how that writing can be customized. Okay, and just things we talk about, losing abbreviations and acronyms like PCR is not going to be familiar to everyone. H2O, maybe that's high school level mastery. We talk about scientific papers. That's lingo, right? Papers. Paper doesn't mean that to everyone. Okay, so it's word use, it's phrasing. So what does it cost to read the writing? Ask yourself, what are the readers giving up in order to complete the task of reading the writing? And how can you decrease the cost? And what are the potential rewards? And how might the reader benefit from reading it? And how can I increase these rewards? Okay. The cost is pretty much the same for everyone, right? It's the time taken to do it. Okay. But the rewards can be quite different depending on the audience. Okay. So for example, can anyone think of, so I myself, I have been on grant panels. Okay, these are like an NSF panel. We get like 8 or 10 similar scientists. We sit down in one room. Each one of us has like 15 grant proposals that we present these in detail to the other members in the room, and we just talk about it. We vote on them, we rank them, and so on and so forth. But when I do that, what's my reward for doing that? What's my reward for reading that writing?
You could get insight into your own research, maybe.
Oh yeah, that's great. Yeah, so it's like we get grant proposals. I see the science that's not going to be published for another 2 or 3 years probably. So right, how it benefits me. Yeah. Anyone else? How am I getting rewarded by reading grant proposals?
You can also learn like what types of proposals end up being successful, and then use that in your own lab or teach that to your own students.
Absolutely. Yeah, fantastic. How to write a great proposal. Well, when I read a proposal, what elements sound great to me? Okay, I'm going to reflect those when I write. I think there's always some element of, if I'm on this panel, maybe I have this much better chance of getting that grant that I submit. It's up for renewal next year, and I'm sorry, I have this feel there's like this obligation. And I think that's the same when you're submitting something for a scientific journal, and I ask someone, would they be an ad hoc editor or ad hoc reviewer for this paper? Why do they do that? Well, maybe for all those same reasons. Okay, but maybe they're also thinking, well, you know, if I review this, maybe I have a slightly better chance of getting my next paper accepted at this journal. Okay, these are all kind of different rewards. Okay, now if we're talking about the general public, those would be quite different, right? Okay. Costs are pretty much the same for everyone. You know, the time taken to read it. And how do we reduce those costs? Of course, we make the writing clear, succinct. Okay, the better we can write, the lower that cost. Just as an example, and this is an example of like how something is done, but there's probably a better way. And we were talking about this in my writing class last week. And this is from Sean. And I told Sean that I'd be showing this, and he's cool with it. So this is what's called a announcement of final oral defense. Okay, and we do this, you do this, right? This is a something that's when the student is going up to the thesis defense or the dissertation defense. They write an abstract of the research. You know, it gets sent around by email. It gets posted in hallways, and so on and so forth. But who is the audience? Who is Sean's audience right here with this document? It's like the whole department, right? It's students, it's faculty, the chairman, maybe undergraduate students. Okay, and so we said, well, okay, so first of all, you know, stylistically, this has a lot to be improved. We're not talking about presentation here, but we don't want just a whole block of impenetrable text here, right? Because that's one thing that puts you off. But who's going to read this? Probably not very many people, because when I look at the first sentence, I see indoor controlled environment agriculture systems allow for the precise manipulation of the mean daily temperature, MDT, carbon dioxide concentration, CO2, and radiation duration, intensity, and quality. And even for me as a horticulturist, that is too much to deal with. Okay, I want to know the impacts of agriculture, that most agriculture is going to controlled environment. I want to know, I don't want to see abbreviations and acronyms. Instead of mean daily temperatures, MDT, just say temperature, just say carbon dioxide, and just say light, okay? And explain this in such a way that all of your audience can understand, okay? And again, this is fine. This is the way it's done, okay? But perhaps if the purpose is to disseminate information to the entire department, this should be written in a very different way. Okay, and so with that, I want to get to our next breakout section, and I call that defining your audience and adapting your writing. And so I'd like each of you to discuss your particular audience. What's their scientific background, expertise in the subject, what's their motivation and the reward for reading this thing. Okay. Check to ensure that your writing is tailored for your specific audience, and if not, adapt it. But the fun part, okay, make this writing accessible to the other members of your breakout room. Okay, adapt it. And other students, like, notice how this writing gets adapted for what should be a more general audience. Okay, so thanks everyone. And it was really, really fascinating for me to go through the breakout rooms, and what I found were generally very, very well written abstracts, and people fairly comfortable with their writing for a very specific audience, and maybe a little bit less comfortable with translating that writing for me and for the fellow students in the breakout rooms. And so the last one I was in, was it was actually I didn't understand any of it. It's like artificial intelligence with lots of words I didn't recognize. And I challenged that person to come up with 2 sentences. One, an introductory sentence that would try to explain that research to a general audience, such as myself. And one, an impact statement that gets tagged at the end to tell the general audience, like, why this is important, like how this discovery affects them. And to do that with only 15 words. 15 words in the introduction and 15 words in the impact statement. And I would like to challenge all of you with that similar thing. Come up with a general statement of introduction, 15 words, that will orient your research with not necessarily the general public, but with your fellow students. Okay. And come up with a 15-word impact statement that then tells this audience why this research is important. Okay. Beyond this very specific field of knowledge. Okay. And that transitions very nicely into writing effective abstracts. This is the third part of the talk. I'll yak a little bit here and then turn you back into the breakout rooms and just let you work as long as you want. Okay. So what's an abstract? I think you're all familiar with this. But I want to underscore the importance of an abstract. Okay. Because the abstract is something that will be read by many people. Okay. What you actually write, the manuscript, maybe few people will read it, relatively few people. But as many people that read the actual paper, there's going to be like 50 or 100 or more that look at the abstract. And why is that? Well, I mean, it's just, abstracts are published, a database of abstracts. They're shorter, they're more accessible. For that reason, they have to be written for a broader audience. Okay? Slightly broader audience. And I hate to say it, that many scientists are lazy. They don't actually read your paper. They'll only read the abstract. And they may cite your work only from the abstract. Okay, this is sad, but it's true. And so your abstract should contain the most important elements of your work. And then something else that's kind of sad but true, and again, very cynical from an editor's point of view, in that readers tend to form opinions very quickly. And if they sit down with your paper, they're gonna read the title, they're gonna start through the abstract, and maybe into the paper. But I promise you that for most readers, by the time that they've gone most of the way through the abstract, they've already decided in their mind whether they like this or whether they don't like this, whether they accept it or whether they're going to reject it. And if they accept it, they're going to read through your paper in a positive light, looking for things that support their acceptance. And if they reject it, they're going to read through looking for things that support their rejection. And again, sad but true. That's why this abstract is very important. Okay, and that's true for grant proposals too. So here's my advice for writers of abstracts. Again, write for the busy reader who'd rather be doing something else. Reward the reader by telling a good story. Keep the language concise. Be accurate when describing data. Include your major important results, but not your minor results. If they're not important, they're not likely to be cited, don't put them in. Use appropriate level of precision when describing data. Don't say that something shows this when it actually just suggests this. Be clear and be objective. So I want to go through the parts of the abstract, okay? Different abstract architectures. And I have to tell you that the advice I'm giving you now is just very general. And so I just looked at 8 abstracts from you guys, okay? Each one was different in terms of its structure, its architecture, okay? And so take this with a grain of salt as well. In the background introduction, you already know your audience, right? And so include only the information that helps your audience to appreciate the results presented in the abstract, okay? If you include too much for your audience, right, that's a length problem. Too little, they're not going to understand what you're about to talk about. 1 to 3 sentences, okay, progression from general to more focused, okay. Start out broadly, okay, very general introduction. And then and then maybe another sentence like linking that very general introduction with your specific research. Examples. This is from my field. These are examples of background introduction statements that I've taken from works that have already been published. And I'll just read one of these. It's down here. And this is talking about leaf shape in watermelon. So the lobed leaf character is a unique morphological trait in crops, featuring many potential advantages for agricultural productivity. Although the majority of watermelon varieties feature lobed leaves, the genetic factors responsible for lobe leaf formation remain elusive. Okay. Now, here are 2 sentences. The first one is a very general statement talking about leaf shape in crop plants. And this one is kind of restricts it and then talks about watermelon, talks about the genetic basis, and nicely transitions into the upcoming statement of research. The problem statement. Okay, in my view, abstract should have a very engaging problem statement. What is this? It captures the intention of the reader. It suggests what the focus of the study is. It links the background with the objective and the approach. And it takes the form of, although we know a lot about X, we don't know so much about Y. Okay, although this particular topic has been studied to death, no one has even looked into this other related topic. Okay, something like that. Although this is known, something else is known. I show you some examples of what I think to be excellent problem statements from journals in my field. Let me look at this one down here. An interesting phenomenon is that the reciprocal hybrids usually show different phenotypes, but its underlying mechanism is not well understood. Or this one. Despite progress in deciphering plant volatile biosynthesis, their release from the cell has been poorly understood. Okay? Although this is known, this other thing is not known. This captures attention. This is engaging. Okay? This sets up an element of intrigue. Objective and approach. Objective, of course, the objective of the study was, or the study was designed to do this. Approach. We approach this by, not methods, not specific, specific details, but general approach. We took a transcriptional profiling approach, or we did a GWAS study, or we crowdsourced, butterfly information, something like this. This is a general approach. Good examples of this. Let me look at this one. The objective of the study was to determine the effect of flour and moisture content during extrusions on in vitro fermentation properties of whole grain extracts. That was the objective. Extrudates were processed at 3 moisture levels, blah, 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 blah. The extrudates were then subject to in vitro digestion and fermentation. Or this one. The objective of the study was to identify QTLs associated with drought tolerance and brachypodium. Okay. We assessed leaf fresh weight, blah, 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 blah. Okay. How the objective was accomplished, the approach. Results, again, include the important results, not so much the ones that aren't going to be cited. In my view, the results should make up at most about 1/2 of the abstract. Interpretation, discussion, and conclusion. Sum up all of your results in a single or a couple of sentences. Taken together, these results suggest, or we interpret this data as showing, based on these experiments, we conclude, okay? And then impact statement. What do the results mean to this specific field of study, but more generally to science, humanity? What effect do findings have on further studies? How does the new knowledge change the way we view and think about things? How does it address previously unknown things? In 1 or 2 sentences, just like the introduction. In the introduction, you're starting broad and restricting. In the impact statements, you have 2 sentences. One is talking about general impact for your specific field of study. And then more broadly, how does it impact something outside the field of study? Examples. These novel QTLs will potentially assist in the screening of aroma compounds in grapevines. Or let's look at this one at the end here. The practical method described in the study will facilitate peach breeding and germplasm management. Furthermore, the methods can be implemented across a diverse range of plants for crop improvement. Okay, what does it mean for the specific field of study? What does it mean for other things outside that field? Okay. Other considerations, your audience is wider.
A quick question, if we could, before we move on here.
Sure.
So I'm a little bit curious. So I definitely understand for the results section, you want to put like the results that you're, I guess, more confident in. But could you explain a little bit like your thought process for anticipating which are the key results, the ones that you anticipate will be cited versus the ones that might not be and thus don't make the cut in the abstract and maybe stay in the main text of the paper?
I think it goes back to the story. And what are the results? What are the results that are most important to telling the story? And I've got an example here that might address that question. So this is from Nature, okay? And yeah, geek alert, I do read stuff for fun sometimes from Nature. But so this paper is talking about a mutation in a moth that caused the moth from going from a white form to a dark form. And this mutation took place during the Industrial Revolution and had the effect of changing the population of moths from mostly dark or mostly white to mostly dark. Okay, and I think you've probably read this study before, but what they found here is that this mutation was due to a transposon, okay, that took place about the time of the Industrial Revolution that interrupted a gene required for wing formation. Okay, and James, let's look at the results part here. Well, let me just go on, because what I've done here is I've dissected this abstract into what I feel that are the important components. The background here, and who's the audience? So Nature, it's a very general journal, right? So it's a wide swath of biologists mostly. Discovering mutational events that fuel adaptation to environmental change remains an important challenge for evolutionary biology. The classroom example is industrial melanism in the peppered moth, blah, 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 driven by bird predation and coal pollution. So notice here this very general statement. starting in the second sentence, something that links this general background with the research. This is a problem statement. The carbon area locus has been coarsely localized to a 200K region, but the specific identity, basically the specific identity of the gene that's disrupted is unknown. And so all the results, James, are right here. We showed the mutation was the insertion of a transposable element. Statistical inference, blah, 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 suggests it occurs around 1819. It increases the abundance of cortex, this gene that's important for wing development. And I don't show you that here, but James, notice that these results are, it's less than half of the abstract. Okay, again, it's a general audience. Okay, so they really have to pack it with a lot of the other material. But there are three major results. And each of these results is reflected in the main manuscript by a discussion and a main figure. Okay, so not all research comes out to be looking like so well organized. But in this case, they had three major results, and they restrict each of those results to a single sentence in the abstract. And this down here at the end, this is the impact statements. So our findings fill a substantial knowledge gap in the iconic example of microevolutionary change, blah, 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 natural selection. Okay, that's kind of, well, okay, right? That's what this means for this particular field of study. Okay, but then look how they're going to leave the reader. The discovery that the mutation is a transposable element will stimulate further debate about the importance of jumping genes as a source of major phenotypic novelty. Okay, that's huge. All right, so just as in the beginning, they kind of drew the reader in with this very general statement, now they're letting the reader go with this very, very general statement of impact. Did that help?
Yeah, I think so. And it's in this particular example, I guess the results that have made the cut into the abstract here all sort of inform this impact statement that they end up with.
That's true. Mm-hmm. So basically that's my advice on abstracts. I'm going to leave you in the breakout rooms again. And at some point, I'm just going to sneak away and let you work as long as you want with your groups. Okay. I hope some of the advice that I've been trying to give you will turn out to be helpful in your writing. Thank you for your attention, and I'm always happy to engage by email afterwards if you have any questions or comments. So at this point, I'm going to try to join your breakout room, and we'll put you back into the breakout rooms. But if I don't see you again, thanks very much for your attention, and had a great time. And again, I hope you got something out of it.